Chers téléspectateurs, bienvenue sur Africa 24. Nationalisme, protectionnisme, unilatéralisme, militarisme, quelques mots qui définissent la politique américaine sous l'ère Donald Trump. America First, une idéologie qui était au cœur de la campagne du président américain en 2016 et qui aujourd'hui est au centre de sa politique étrangère. Alors, qu'est-ce que cela signifie pour l'Afrique? Pour répondre à cette question, nous recevons aujourd'hui Scaramucci, ancien directeur de la communication de la Maison Blanche et également fondateur du fonds d'investissement SkyBridge Capital. Thank you for having us, Mr. Scaramucci. President Trump implements an America First policy, yet he wants America to regain its prestige on the world stage. How will the country regain its position as the leader of the free world economically while distancing itself from its allies around the world with its America First policy?
So I think it's a lot more complicated than it's being explained in the traditional media, but I think there's two goals. Number one, the president is a globalist, but he's also concerned about the American working class family. And so as an evidence of the fact that he's a globalist, he attended the World Economic Forum in January of 2018. So what the president's message really is, I need to work very hard to fix my country. I need to restore middle class and lower middle class wages, which is very good for the world because the United States is a consumer-based country, and higher middle class wages and lower middle class wages means more aggregate demand and more purchasing power. And so this is a byproduct of the president's policies, but that is concomitant to trying to improve America's world standing. And so if we can fix our internal problems, the president believes that we'll have a much better external image.
So President Trump signed a bill a month ago creating a new foreign aid agency, the United States International Development Finance Corporation. The agency has the authority to provide $60 billion in loans, loan guarantees and insurance to companies willing to do business in developing nations of the African continent. What provoked the pullback from his initial agenda to slash U.S. aid from 28% to 30%?
So I think what happens to many presidents, including President Trump, is that they have an idea of what they want to do, and then their ideas meet contact with reality. And I think when he looks at the emerging markets, and particularly into Africa, he recognizes that the growth in Africa is also linked to American economic growth. And so he's making a bet that he wants to put assets and loan guarantees and things related to the United States into Africa, which will create a good feeling in Africa and will lead to a better bilateral economy where exports will be coming into the U.S. and we'll be able to import things into Africa.
Concerning exports, why is President Trump creating tensions with some African countries, refusing to sell second-hand American clothes? We are talking about countries that are trying to protect their economies as America is. So,
you know, it's not necessarily that he has a problem with Rwanda or other countries that are following a country-first policy. I think all he's really trying to do is he's trying to balance the interests of the United States with the interests of others. And I think if you go back to the end of the Second World War to today, you have about a 73-year history where the United States has really been in a position, if you think of the Marshall Plan, or you think of the original General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs, the first GATT talks, the United States has left the playing field very uneven, where goods and services can flow freely into the United States, but our goods and services leaving our country, we've accepted tariffs and embargoes in order to protect the labor markets of other countries. And so I think right now, there's just a tension there because this 73-year policy has been very good for the world, but it's had a deleterious side effect on middle class and lower middle class working families. So I think some of these policies now that the world is surprised by are really just positional policies to try to protect American workers.
Over the last 5 years, U.S. exports to sub-Saharan Africa have averaged $19 billion. Two-way trade has fallen from a high $100 billion in 2008 to $39 billion in 2017, largely due to U.S. energy self-sufficiency. The African continent is likely to present 5.6 trillion in market opportunities and a population over 1.52 billion consumers in 2025. How does America plan to renew its commercial strategy with the continent?
So, I mean, I think one of the first things is the U.S. Development Corporation and providing up to $60 billion of loan guarantees. But I think the secondary thing, which is very important, is U.S. multinationals are really trying to establish and grow a presence in Africa. And what you'll find is that your GDP, the continent's GDP in Africa, is growing at almost 2 times the North American GDP. And so for American countries, American companies, they need to be positioned in Africa, take advantage of that. And the good news is that once the president became president, looked at the macroeconomic landscape and the potential symmetry and potential growth, the bilateral growth that the 2 continents could have, he started changing his policies to be more pro-Africa, more friendly to the continent.
Talking about that, China has established itself as the biggest trade partner of African countries. How is President Trump lessening China's influence on the African continent?
Well, I definitely think, I think one of the issues that the United States has had, frankly, is that the Chinese have very long-term planning, and so they have 10, 25, and 50-year plans, and because of the way our election cycles work, we have a tendency to have very short-term plans. And so I think one of the problems is once the president looked at the competitive landscape and recognized that China had such a big footprint and presence in Africa, he realized that he needed to put more assets in Africa. But the big fear that I have for our country is that these plans are quite short-lived because of the changing political dynamic.
The results of the recent midterms elections in the United States have created a new political landscape for the Trump administration. The Republicans skipped the Senate but now have conceded the House of Representatives to the Democrats. How do you think that new dynamic will affect President Trump's foreign policy and his policy in general?
So it's a little early to really tell right now, but I mean, there's 2 ways this could go. The first way, the more positive way, is that the president could potentially reach a bipartisan deal on immigration or infrastructure with the House. I think this would be positive for both Democrats and Republicans that are trying to become president in 2020. It would show the American people what they're longing for, which is a commitment from their politicians to try to get along better. A more negative potential outcome could be that the House of Representatives, controlled by the Democrats, have subpoena and investigatory powers, and they could start launching investigations against the president, his family, and other members of the administration. I think this would be a terrible thing to have happen, because then the president would instigate his friends in the Senate, which is obviously has a much higher margin now, to do the same thing to the Democrats. And so this is the sort of thing that the American people would be very frustrated by. They recognize that there are flaws and potential indiscretions on both sides, and what they're really looking for is kind of a healing government that's committed to bipartisan progress. So I'm hopeful that things go directionally in a more positive light, but politics in the U.S. in the last, say, 10 to 15 years have been very diametrically opposed. So it could cause a problem for the president.
Talking about immigration, in January, a new American economy released a report on the contributions of immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa to the U.S. economy, stating they earn around $55 billion and pay nearly $15 billion in taxes. The question of immigration is very important to President Trump. Republicans are calling for strict caps and even reductions in legal immigration visas. Given the positive economic impact they have on the country, why is that?
Well, I think it's less specific to Africa and sub-Saharan countries, and it's more broad as it relates to the overall immigration policies. I think one of the big economic successes that the president has had is that he's tightened the labor market in the African American and Hispanic American communities in the U.S., and it's caused the bottom 10% of the United States to experience real wage growth. In the last year, there's 5.5% real wage growth has taken place in the U.S. And so the president would say, if he was sitting in this chair, that's a direct result of curbing both illegal immigration and being way more propitious on legal immigration. And so I think it's less specific to sub-Saharan Africa and more broadly related to the rest of the world. Having said that, I think if we can get a bipartisan immigration deal done, places like sub-Saharan Africa, at the extent that people want to come to the United States legally, I think they'll be surprised at the openness related to that once a deal is eventually completed.
About your hedge fund, you are the founder of SkyBridge Capital. Is there a place for African investors? Do you have an eye on Africa?
Yeah, I mean, it totally is. I mean, I think that African sovereign wealth funds, as well as African high net worth individuals and large institutions, I think could benefit from our product, because our product is basically not correlated to the global stock or bond market, and we're seeking absolute returns in the high single digits. And so for the last 15 years, we've been delivering about a 9% return with a quarter of the standard deviation of the overall global market. So African investors, I think, would be a prime target for our fund. I mean, one of the problems is that we started from absolutely nothing. So 15 short years ago, we had 3 people in a room. Today, we have 60 people and just over $10 billion in assets. And so our focus hasn't really been in Africa, but this is something that I want to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years.
Oh, and would you have specific sectors where you would like to invest?
So as related to Africa, the things that we would be most interested in would be infrastructure and energy-related investments. Infrastructure would include mobile and things related to further connecting the continent.
Thank you, Anthony Scaramucci, for answering our questions.
Okay. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Merci à vous, chers téléspectateurs, de nous avoir suivis. Et n'oubliez pas, vous pouvez retrouver cette émission et l'ensemble de nos programmes sur www.africa24tv.com. À bientôt pour un nouveau décryptage.